Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thanks to Sales Confidence for putting on this event. And obviously thank you to all the attendees, because you guys make it worthwhile for us to speak at these types of events. So I'm going to jump right into my topic. As James mentioned, it's about the healthy handoff between SDRs and AEs. And I think the other speakers brought up a lot of really great points about, Sarah and Raj both talked about culture and the clarity and communication. Luke talked about, putting structure behind the SDR position. And these are all really important pieces that come into play during the handoff as well. So first off, let's dive into it. There are 5 principles that I want you guys to take away today. And the first one is getting comfortable with the concept of a specialized sales team. And that might seem really obvious, because obviously you can't have a handoff process unless there's a handoff actually happening. But a lot of companies take full cycle sales reps and they hold on to those positions for a lot longer than they should. And at some point, they end up having such a large laundry list of responsibilities, and the volume of their responsibilities goes up as the company grows too, that they inevitably become less successful at handling any aspect of that sales process. What you end up looking at is productivity kind of looks like this wave-like pattern, and you have hills and valleys of revenue production and then stall points. And what's happening there is the rep has to step away and perform research in order to fuel their own pipeline. So the only way to really change that and move away from that stutter pattern of that wave and change it to a cycle is not by reducing volume, because obviously nobody wants to do that, but by instead specializing the function of the sales group. So you want to split those up to the SDR and the AE. After you've done so, you also want to make sure that you're splitting out the job descriptions for each of those roles. That's principle number 2. Obviously, this helps with the hiring process more than anything else. You can get the right candidates in the door, but it also really helps us to reckon with this constant stigma that everybody deals with, and that's that SDRs are second-class citizens compared to AEs. And that's simply not true. You wouldn't look at 2 scientists, right? One who's collecting field samples and one who's analyzing things behind a microscope, and say, well, one is more trustworthy or one is more valuable to the process. You need both of them. Same thing goes for business. The SDRs are serving up the qualified leads and giving the AEs something to work on and use their time effectively for in managing pipeline. And then obviously the AEs are there to close that business and keep everybody growing and running in line. So if you don't think that you buy into that belief that SDRs are less valuable, take a look at your career development pathway. And this is a really easy thing to look at. If your SDRs have a direct promotion path to AE, it suggests that you're thinking, okay, the SDR is the training sort of period for the AE. And really you can develop those SDR skills and have a really advanced and talented SDR individual and keep your AE as a completely separate position. So I challenge you to look at those. Now, if we're talking about building the job descriptions, obviously we want some actionable items. For SDRs, I would say the big things to look at would be researching new prospects, setting appointments, and then conducting intro and discovery calls, actually handling the calls themselves, not just appointment setting. For AEs, you're going to obviously be conducting the qual calls and demo calls, the things that take place after that initial conversation. And then you're also going to be managing pipeline. Now, I know I mentioned getting rid of the full cycle sales reps, but another thing that AEs are really well positioned for based on their tenure and their experience in the industry is to, from a full cycle standpoint, handle engagement with target accounts. They know how to get in the doors. They know how to look for the right players. They know how to spend their time effectively. It doesn't always make sense in a target account, especially when you're developing a relationship and a lot of trust, to have a handoff in that process. So consider that as well for your AE responsibilities. Principle number 3, you want to establish KPIs that recognize the right accomplishments. So to be clear, everybody's responsibility, we know, throughout the organization, whether in operations or marketing or product or whatever, everybody is responsible for driving revenue at the end of the day. So knowing that, it's dangerous for us to assume that SDRs or or even AEs should be evaluated based off of their execution of activities. So activity volumes, calls made, emails sent. Instead, we want to look at, based on our org's maturity, KPIs that start with literal metrics, and then we want to work backwards to inferential metrics. And to translate that and put that in more simple terms, our revenue contributions are going to be the literal contributions, right? Our AEs are managing pipeline, so that's pretty obvious. When they close revenue, they've made a contribution there. If you don't have this in place, I would advise you to structure your CRM so that you can attach SDR names to your opportunities and deal records as well. That way you can have this full view of, has an SDR contributed to that revenue closure as well? And as you have the relationship, the organization's maturity continues and your KPIs become a little bit more rigid, you have a good idea of your qualification criteria, you have a good idea of your conversion rates, take a step back and look at your SDRs and instead evaluate them on qualified prospects produced. And that does not necessarily mean meetings booked. It's not the same thing. The important piece is that you have prospects that are vetted by the SDRs and also accepted by the AEs. And you might think, well, how do I read that in my system? Pretty easy. If you are creating opportunities after an SDR has engaged, then that's a reason to believe that a prospect was accepted by the AE. So take a look at your ops count and see who's contributing to that in terms of new ops created in a handoff. The fourth fourth principle, now we're getting into more tactical ideas, is defining the handoff point. So the handoff point is going to be that exact moment where you want the record to transfer from the SDR to the AE. And it very simply happens when the prospect is qualified. From a CRM standpoint, this can mean a whole bunch of different technical actions. So it's really tough to evaluate that based on your different systems. It could be hitting a conversion button or reassigning an owner or any other number of actions for changing lifecycle stages. So keep it focused on the event, that qualification and that acceptance, and then choose a technical action that makes sense from the user standpoint. You want to make it easy to do, and you also want it to be very visible to the SDR, to the AE, and in your reporting as well, in your KPI reporting. The main takeaway for evaluating the handoff point is that you want to make sure that that visibility is there because the AE is accountable for this degree of SDR success. If they are not working a handed off lead with urgency, then you're wasting the investment in that SDR and you're devaluing their work. Now, the next one is defining the handoff criteria. This is different from the point that happens itself. So here we're talking about qualification. And in this case, it's actually the SDR has the accountability for the AE's success. So if a lead isn't adequately qualified, it's going to be a waste of the AE's talent and time to work on that record. So to make sure everybody's in line, you really can use any qualification framework you want. Usually for SDRs, you have something a little bit more simplified, not talking about relationships. So things like BANT, CHAMP. It doesn't really matter what methodology you use, but both the SDRs and the AEs should understand what the meaning of that framework is. They should understand when the qual criteria are being met. Those are two different things. And then you also want to make sure that anyone reviewing a given CRM record can quickly observe whether or not qual criteria has been met. And that's especially during the point of handoff. So if anybody that you're going to focus time on training, hey, recognize whether or not this person is qualified, it's going to be AE who's going to be receiving that record. And finally, we want to just reinforce that fairly often. So when we have our qualification criteria defined, the SDR's experience, the AE's experience, marketing's experience, customer success, they're all going to have contributions to make that identify and refine what our idea of qualified is. So it's not just a profile fit. It could be some other dimension of attitude or refining what the need criteria is. So we want to collect that information, retrain on it as much as possible. If you didn't hear anything else, I know I'm a little over time here, but the main concepts: define what your team's roles mean and how they contribute to the big picture of driving revenue. Identify the actions expected of each position, and then celebrate the accomplishments of every team member. And once you do that, you're able to keep people engaged, prevent burnout, encourage creativity in the sales position, which is also something that we really don't emphasize enough. And most importantly, at least for this topic, you're going to foster collaboration between members of the sales org. So I'm Blake Kendrick at SalesWorks. That's my topic. Thank you very much for listening.